casted on live streaming with a presentation. So if you could press the
Good morning, everybody. My name is Katia Simeonova. I'm SBI coordinator, and I'm also manager within the UNFCCC Secretariat of the Transparency Framework, which is a sub-program that also deals with the broader land use issues and other sectoral approaches. I have a pleasure and the opportunity to provide with some welcome remarks for this particular session of the technical examination meeting, also known as TEM. I also have a pleasure to introduce the speakers for this very interesting and important session that will focus on the issues in relation to agriculture. I would like to start with a very important question. Why the theme on agriculture in the context of the broader land use issues is important in terms of climate change and sustainable development. And I see many familiar faces of colleagues and friends, and you can imagine that the first level answer is pretty obvious. This is because land use issues, including forestry and agriculture, including soils, account for a very important share of the global emissions. According to IPCC, they account for 24% of the global emissions, or 10 to 12 gigaton in year 2000. However, the agricultural sector also offers enormous opportunities and solution space through climate action to achieve both significant emission reductions and to deliver also sizable adaptation benefits to inevitable changes in climate that we are observing even now. In the same time, agriculture could also, through this kind of action, maintain its ability to provide livelihoods for millions of people and also to maintain and enhance food security, an important issue to keep in mind when we speak about climate change in agriculture context. These opportunities have been very clearly recognized by parties that submitted in their NDCs quite sizable component on agriculture. However, NDCs are still statements of intent, and they need to be turned into action plans in order to attract the necessary investment to achieve the action at necessary scale that the Paris Agreement requires. And last but not least, any action in agriculture needs to recognize the multifaceted nature of this important sector of economy and society, and also huge diversity of stakeholders and that needs to be involved in any such action. This is where my view is that the TEM role could be as an innovative approach in the UNFCCC context. TEM can provide an opportunity for sharing experiences, good practices that could be scaled up and replicated, and that can help to identify further opportunities for forging partnerships and cooperation among parties and non-state actors. It can also provide enormous opportunities to benefit from the wealth of experience of recognized international organizations such as FAO to contribute to the discussion and to action, facilitating action on this important topic. Today we have a distinguished panel with representatives for a number of countries that will help us or walk us through the experiences of these countries in the area of agriculture. We'll have distinguished speakers from Japan, Ms. Akiko Nagano. Hi. Then from Kenya, Ms. Lucy Nganga. From New Zealand, my neighbor, Dr. Victoria Hatton. Brazil, Dr. Gustavo Moser. Then from the European Union, Mr. Herwin Panner. Very good. And then going back to Africa, Botswana, Professor Nnyaladzi Batisani. Very good. We'll have also brief introduction and interventions from research NGOs, Dr. Bruce Campbell, and from farmer constituencies, Mr. Theo de Jager. So without any more words of introduction, I would like to invite you to start our exciting presentations and discussions in which I hope you'll find a lot of useful information and experiences that you can contribute to the discussion, but also bring back home. And it's my pleasure to announce our first speaker, Dr. Martial Bernoux, who is a natural resource officer from FAO. Very good.
although we are increasing trees in the forest land, remember the forest land is also under siege from other development spheres of the economy, the real estate, the increased agriculture production, and therefore it then means it's on the farm where we are likely to get more trees going into. And looking at what the IPCC document indicated, that agroforestry offered the highest potential for carbon sequestration that will be a benefit to the climate. The contribution of forest to, once you have agroforestry integrated with more farmers in a country, then you're reducing that invasion into the forest looking for firewood and other benefits. These are some of the examples. Then we have, you could see that a farmer there with harvested the firewood, but still the trees are still within the farm and continuing to do what they have to do, holding the soil together. The other one that is not, I hope it's very clear, it's a fruit tree. That's for nutrition. If you look at the picture that is down there, of course, the integration there does not equate to production, unlike other theories that when you integrate crops with trees, that the crops causes less production. That crop there looks healthy. The same here. So these are some of the examples. One of them to restore soil and water conservation, integrating fruit trees and other crops, and the youths and the farmer get incomes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. You see, that's certainly a fantastic example about all the core benefits that you have in applying right agricultural technology, particularly in employment, as much of the methodology translates into manual labor and employment for many people. And let us not forget that agriculture is still the biggest employer of this planet, with an estimated more than 1 billion people working in agriculture. Now, let me go to Dr. Victoria Hatton from New Zealand, from the Ministry of Primary Industries, who is going to share with us experiences in livestock management. Can I have the switcher, please, for the PowerPoint? In livestock and in grasslands management. Victoria, you have the floor.
Thanks, Martin. It's a pleasure to be here, and seeing the room so full probably indicates how important agriculture is on the agenda of this technical experts meeting. So thank you for the invitation to speak here today. I have a stopwatch on, so I'm going to try desperately to keep to my 5 minutes. We're going to talk about our New Zealand's livestock experience rather than the grassland management side of things. It was too important to pack it into just a 5-minute presentation. So New Zealand has a shared global challenge, and that is that we need to increase food production, which is central to food security, and agriculture production is projected to increase by 60% over the next 40 years to meet growing global demand. Agriculture is an essential part of the economy for many countries and is a key contributor to growth and development. Agriculture, though, contributes 14% of global greenhouse gas emissions, and this is expected to grow, which reflects the increasing global demand for food and the decarbonisation of other sectors like transport and transport and energy. The solutions for agriculture are difficult to implement, and obviously they need the buy-in of millions of farmers to make them useful. And while agriculture is not necessarily the largest emitter for many countries, in time we believe it will become so, and the future emissions profiles for many countries are likely to be very different from today. And I'd just like to take the opportunity to show, using this graphic image, that under the global agriculture emissions, under the 2-degree scenario, that agriculture will play a significant part with methane and nitrous oxide in the future projections. So New Zealand at a glance. We're very unique for a developed country. We have a high proportion of emissions from the ag sector. 49% of our total emissions come from the ag sector, and over 40% of those are from methane emissions from livestock. Our emissions intensity of our economy, however, has decreased by 34% since 1990. And this is largely because we have a focus on improving agriculture productivity, efficiency and resilience while reducing our environmental footprint. And I really like this graph because it shows each dot represents a country, looking at low productivity, high intensity, going down to high productivity and low intensity. The red circle on this represents where New Zealand approximately lies on this graph. We are still only, we believe we're fairly highly productive in our livestock sector, but we are still only half as efficient as the EU or the US cow. So how is New Zealand balancing the demands that we have? We implement a suite of policy, on-farm implementation and research and development, and we've really focused our attention over the last 10 years to try and make our livestock sector highly productive. And some examples of how we're doing this. We have a biological emissions reference group, which is a government and private sector reference group, looking at an evidence base for all our policy decisions going forward. It's a fairly new reference group that's only been set up in the last 6 months, and we're expecting a really useful report to come out of that by the end of this year. We have a Sustainable Dairy Water Accord, which is run by Dairy New Zealand, which is our sort of organised sector-led research and implementation body. That water accord will lead to a 4% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions with no land use change, but it's expected with some land use change, so from dairy to forestry, we'd have a 13% reduction in our emissions. Research and development, we've invested $450 million over the last 10 years approximately from our government fund into emissions mitigation research, and we've leveraged about $700 million in private sector research money. That probably doesn't seem a lot to many countries, but for the size and scale of New Zealand, that's a significant amount of money and investment into this area of research. One of our biggest funding parts has gone into the New Zealand Agricultural Greenhouse Gas Research Centre, which has a programme on soil carbon sequestration, nitrogen and methane emissions. And we have a primary growth partnership, which is a private sector and government co-led investment programme. And on-farm implementation, which is really important. 96% of our rivers are dairy cattle free. We have tools on farm which include Overseer, which is a nutrient budget calculator which allows farmers to see exactly what they're using on farm. This saves them money as well as being environmentally friendly. What have we done? We've decreased our emissions intensity from all sectors. I'm very conscious I've run over time. This is my very last slide though. Our sheep meat has fallen by 30%, dairy has fallen by 24%, and beef has fallen by 30% overall. And some international initiatives that New Zealand is engaged in, but I'll leave that up. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Victoria. Our next speaker is from Brazil, from the Brazilian Agriculture Research Corporation. Dr. Gustavo Moser is going to talk to us about integrated system, and I think that is already something which is coming up again and again on how to close the loops between the different agricultural production systems. Dr. Moser, you have the floor, please.
Thank you. I'll just start my counter here so that I try to fit in the time too. Thank you for the opportunity. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'll also talk a bit about Brazilian experience in terms of implementing agriculture activities under climate change. We have this called the ABC plan in Brazil, which is our way of addressing climate change after Copenhagen. It has been based on a set of knowledge that we can address climate change in the agriculture sector with multiple ways. We understand. Oh, sorry. There's increase in productivity and revenue of the agricultural people. Will deliver good quality food, natural fibers, and energy. Increase the adaptation and resilience as well, putting agriculture in a path of sustainability over time, not only today but all over time. with understanding there's availability of sharing knowledge, experience, and reduce risks and impacts in the climate change, and also the mitigation component, which is also very important, and it will reduce the amount of carbon in the system. And in that sense, we have prepared in Brazil a set of technologies that we understand that are all within this scope, and they are a fruit of over 40 years of research in Brazil on agriculture, climate, tropical agricultural systems. So we have plenty of options in Brazil regarding planted forests, biological fixation, no tillage, pasture recovery, manure treatment, and the topic within I will describe more thoroughly here, which is the integrated crop livestock systems. For us, integrated crop livestock systems were thought as like this very difficult, more complex technology. So when we thought our planning, we decided to go for pasture recovery, which for us will be a natural step towards that in terms of giving the opportunity for people to learn and understand better how to do the conservative agricultural systems. And we are aiming to the integrated crop livestock forest systems as like the best possible approach, at least in terms of how to move forward. That's why we were aiming towards much larger numbers in terms of pasture recovery and smaller numbers in terms of crop integrated systems. But as the implementation started, we saw a lot of interest from the private sector in that sense. So what happens in Brazil, our case is that we last year we assessed the how much we have implemented integrated crop systems, and we have surpassed our expectations in terms of target. We were aiming for 9. And we are already in 11, but in 2015, not in 2013 as we were expecting. This has really been very interesting for us in Brazil, because we saw a shift in terms of how the agricultural people see moving towards sustainable systems as an opportunity, not as a risk, not as a cost, but they are looking at this as a real a huge leap for a step forward in terms of how agricultural systems are being thought and being put in towards the world. You see, the idea there is that we have the agriculture, the farmer as the center of our policy. We have to think about their needs, their necessities. So when they are dealing with climate change, they have to look at it as something that will drive them positively forward. That will inspire them to shift their way of doing systems, so that they have a clear knowledge that they are wins technology. There are triple wins, 4 wins, how many possible wins. So we have the financing process, but also training, about also researching, and also communicating, because this is very important. The way you communicate to them that we are preparing, and well, in a proper governance matter, so that things are well taken care. So just to finish up, this is my last one, I suppose. Just to show you that what we've been accomplishing, this picture shows the level of implementation of investments in Brazil that are associated to the implementation of this ABC program. And we are coming towards surpassing what we were initially expecting, at least in this more complex, which is technology that is the integrated systems. The other ones are coming well, but not not with this big hype as we have in the integrated systems. But that's because the people on the ground really understood that they could the implementation of this technology will be much beneficial to them in multiple areas. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Moser. And I think if you look at nature itself and see the highly complex and interlinked systems in nature, it's not surprising that mimicking these systems in agriculture actually produce more than one win. I'm always amazed when people started talking about win-wins in agriculture and then triple wins. And in the meantime, I think we are running out of so many wins. Because the right measures in agriculture are really addressing so many issues at the same time. Let us come to wetlands and peatlands. That's a perspective Herwig Runner is going to take from the EU Commission's Directorate General for Agriculture. Herwig, you have the floor.
Thank you. And my presentation will last for about an hour. No, I'm joking. Wetlands and peatlands are ecosystems that are very important for Europe's biodiversity. And let's just change the slide if it won't. And they also provide really important conditions for all kinds of species and a diversity of habitats. For example, for birds, they are vital nesting grounds and migratory flyaway areas. Dragonflies, amphibians, countless specialist plants. And they also provide a wide range of public goods and services, such as providing freshwater, recreational tourism opportunities. And in addition, and it's a big addition, they also provide a significant carbon pool. And they provide sequestration, so a sink. And they are actually an asset when it comes to reducing levels of greenhouse gases. What also has to be said is that it's an area that is threatened, and because of drainage, land reclamation, pollution, overexploitation. And that means that we have to protect it, and we have to continue efforts to protect and improve the situation for wetlands. So how do we do that? In the EU, you have a number of legal frameworks. For example, the Habitats and Birds Directives, the Water Framework Directive, other environmental directives, such as Urban Waste, Nitrate Directive, an important one, but also the Common Agricultural Policy. And as you might know, in the Common Agricultural Policy, we have a lot of measures that we call agri-environment measures that would lead to the protection of carbon-rich soils. And what we do in this policy is that we make sure that there's a respect of the environmental laws and there's support for farmers that carry out these measures. And these measures would also include, for example, carbon-rich permanent pastures and other activities. There's also a financial instrument that deals with wetlands and peatlands. That's the LIFE instrument. And we have a network of protected sites. It's the Natura 2000 network. And to give you a few best practice examples where some concrete approaches are carried out, such as re-wetting. As we know that hotspots, wetlands are hotspots for greenhouse gas emissions, we need to restore them. Protecting all still undrained organic soils is actually quite important. It seems obvious, but it's also part of it. One has to say that you get a net mitigation effect if you protect the wetlands, because you avoid high emissions that you would have per hectare. And there's also paludiculture that is carried out on wetlands. And if you look at the examples, we try to give a broad range all over the EU, because the EU is also highly diverse in climatic and geographic conditions. So it goes from hydrologic engineering to cattle grazing in Latvia nature management plan. And there's other examples, and there's colleagues here in the room that would also be able to provide examples and answer questions. And for those who are very interested in the subject, we have a publication which you can find by clicking on the link below. And we are, of course, available for all questions related to this topic. I think I stayed well inside the 5 minutes, and I thank you for the attention.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Herwig. Our next and last country speaker is Professor Batisani from Botswana, from the Botswana Institute for Technology, Research and Innovation. And he's going to speak about upscaling climate-smart agriculture in a smallholder farming environment. Do we have Professor Batisani? Yes. Can we just have the device? Please, you have the floor.
Oh, thank you very much. Good afternoon. Botswana is a semi-arid country with a very variable rainfall and frequent droughts. And this is expected to increase with this variability and frequency of droughts with climate change. So on the one hand, this situation poses a challenge to food security because with climate change, it means although already the country is strained because of this natural climate conditions, is going to worsen. But on the other hand, it sort of offers an opportunity or advantage to adapt to climate change, because over the years, in a move to sort of counter the effects of drought to food production, the country has developed tools or technologies to produce food in this arid environment. And these tools which have been developed over the years are basically going to be sort of retrofitted to cope with climate change challenges. So there's already a foundation on which to adapt and mitigate because of these tools which have been sort of developed over the years. And this include crop varieties and also fodder crops. So one of those crops is the Labla papyrus, which is a legume crop, and this legume crop is drought tolerant and also rain fed. It's used for fodder during droughts, and over the years it has sort of gained popularity. It's also used in the crop rotation with other grain feed crops, in that reducing the amount of nitrogen fertilizers to be used, but also capturing nitrous oxide from the air. So basically, with this sort of win-win situation, where you are adapting to produce fodder during droughts, but at the same time you are sort of reducing emissions into the atmosphere through reducing fertilizer use, but also capturing those which have been emitted. So this shows that over the years, although the studies and the trials on this legume started during the 1980s, initially it was not there was no adoption. Adoption was minimal, because I guess by then droughts were not frequent and severe. But with climate change, we find that droughts are becoming more frequent and more severe. Hence, farmers are now adopting this leguminous crop to adapt to climate change and invariably mitigate as they're using less nitrous fertilizers, and also the crop is capturing nitrous oxide. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing the experience from Botswana. Having concluded the presentation from countries, we have two more short presentations from constituencies. And I'm going to start with Dr. Bruce Campbell, just here on my right-hand side, Director of CCAFS, and CCAFS is for Climate Change, Agriculture and Food Security, who's going to share with us particularly the urgency of addressing the agricultural questions. Bruce, you have the floor. Take the microphone, please.
Good. And I know this is a mitigation TEM, and as others have indicated, agriculture cannot be pushed into a box easy enough. I'm from Zimbabwe. This kind of projection suggests a greater than 20% loss in growing season in much of southern Africa by 2100. This is a complete transformation of the agricultural system we know today. But we don't have to only think about today. These are a bulletin of the American Meteorological Society examining extreme events and linking them to climate change, anthropogenic climate change, throughout Africa over these years with major impacts on the food security. But as others have indicated, urgent mitigation action is needed. And a group of scientists have come together, about 30 scientists, and estimate that we need to do 1 gigaton carbon dioxide equivalent reductions by 2030 and still be able to meet future food needs with such a target. So however you want to phrase it, adaptation, food security, and mitigation are intimately put together. When you look at the mitigation things that are happening out in the world, you get all the exciting stories from industry, transport. So I'd like to ask, where are the Teslas of the agricultural world? Somehow or other, agriculture has not got a great image. We really either need to change the image or we need to up our game in terms of innovation. And I think there are some examples out there which suggest we have a few Teslas starting. One of them has been already referenced by the speaker from Japan, alternate wetting and drying in rice production. All you have to do is change the way you water the rice. You can get 30% reduction in water use, which is really important in many countries, and up to 50% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions without compromising yield. I think this is a Tesla which is ready to take off. Breeding, this is drought-tolerant maize, working with 91 local seed companies, millions of farmers. Yields are up 35%, resilient to drought, and reduces the use for more land because of increased production on the available land, therefore reducing mitigation. So once again, a technology which pulls it all together, food security, adaptation, mitigation, and there's many more out there. But of course, we need to up our game in terms of the science community. This is drought adaptation. What about heat? Heat is the real challenge of the future. I think this is the future of agriculture, digital agriculture. So a farmer in Kenya can go and buy a bag of seeds at a remote store, can take a picture of the barcode, can get a message, say, do you want to buy insurance, yes or no? Says yes, gets insurance immediately, paid on his cell phone. He goes and plants the seed. When the rainfall goes below a certain level, an index, he gets instantly paid out by the insurance company. It's index-based insurance. We have to link all the other things to that kind of business model. Weather forecast, climate information so that farmers know what to do, agricultural advisories through cell phones, links to input suppliers to get good prices and bulking up the outputs. I think this is the future of agriculture, but of course it needs major innovation and partnerships. This kind of work has to be linked to traditional and local knowledge of farmers. It has to be linked to the private sector and to the science community and civil society organizations. So there was, if you want more than 4 minutes and 13 seconds, then come on Sunday to this event.
Thank you very much, Bruce, and spectacular timekeeping. Thank you for the electrifying examples, if I can stay in the Tesla example. And also just to add on cell phone technology, there's really new information and new innovation on the way. I've just recently seen an application that actually allows you to take you a picture of a plant to find out what disease is actually affecting this plant. That's particularly helpful when you have changing climate patterns and new diseases in places where they were not before. So our last speaker, our last presentation is coming from Gabor Figetsky from IFORM Organics International. And without much ado, Gabor, I give you the floor for the last presentation. Then I will open up for your comments, for your questions. And again, even if you're in the second row, there will be a roaming microphone. So please do prepare your questions. Gabor, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Martin. I'm representing the farmers' constituency here, which has been very active for at least the last decade in the UNFCCC negotiations. And I'm very happy to see again a crowded room when we talk about farmers' core business, agriculture. And I would like to thank the Secretariat as well as FAO for this opportunity, for giving us the floor and the seat around this table. What I brought here is two examples from two countries which are severely hit by land degradation and whose farmers are already suffering a lot from the direct effects of climate change. One example comes from Ethiopia, from the Tigray region, where land degradation is really severe. You can see these so-called gullies, which clearly show the impacts of land degradation. And what the government used there is the power of nature. They implemented a series of rehabilitation techniques based on natural processes, and as well as, for example, controlled grazing, stopping access to the vulnerable land like watersheds. At the same time, they started to use this wonderful tree species called Sesbania. This is a multi-purpose tree which also helps in land degradation. And a key element, of course, is composting, used in various cultures like wheat, barley, as well as teff. And this whole system has increased productivity quite significantly. And I think productivity increase in itself is mitigation. So you can see the results on this chart. The other example comes from Kenya, where biogas digesters and bioslurry was introduced. In small size, the biogas digesters were small size, and the bioslurry was, of course, used as a liquid fertilizer. And it didn't just lead to a 60% increase in productivity, but also the quality of the produce was enhanced. And as it was mentioned several times, but by many of my colleagues, we are also aiming for multiple benefit solutions. So like this one also had an impact on the welfare of poor rural women through the reduction of time spent in fieldwood collection and by reducing their exposure to toxic fumes from cooking over open fires. So on the basis of these and also re-emphasizing some of the points that my colleagues have made as well, I think it's very, very important to promote scale up and scale out these multiple benefit solutions, like improved management of soil, water, nutrients, livestock health and nutrition, and added to that reductions in greenhouse gas emissions and intensity. And by that, we should always, I agree with Bruce that the future is digital agriculture. I don't think we have a choice there. But at the same time, we need to build on local and indigenous farmer knowledge so that we can scale these examples up and out. We should always bear in mind that no one size fits all. So for all these diverse farming systems across the world, that we have wonderful examples now. And yes, farmers need to be around the table. They always need to have a seat. So I would like to ask you to empower farmers by putting them at the center of the negotiations here as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cabo. I was not aware of the double meaning of farmers needing seeds, but we now know. Let me please thank the panelists of this morning with a big round of applause before I open the floor. Well, thank you everybody for fantastic presentations and for keeping the time, which gives us the luxury situation of having 27 minutes for question, answers, comments, and I look around and I would start with the gentleman all the way to the right, and again there's a roaming microphone available, and then the microphone goes to the person in the back second. Okay, please go ahead, sir. Microphone.
I represent indigenous peoples organizations. We're concerned that the carbon sequestration of our lands and territories, particularly forests, are seen as low-hanging fruit for the generation of offsets, both market and non-market. This includes or attracts unwelcome development attention to the carbon sequestration of our lands and forests. This kind of attention puts a lot of economic pressure on indigenous peoples and small farmers. It's like a gun to their heads. Normally, they violate our rights as people, and ensuring the security and ownership of our forests, lands, and territories is critical, not only to mitigate climate change, but also to the assurance of forest sustainable development. Many studies, including FAO high-level expert panels, have come to the conclusion that the industrialized agriculture is not sustainable, and we second the statements that were made by the farmers that small farms, small-scale farming is sustainable and should be supported. 70% of the people of the world are fed by small producers, and the support shown by the panelists for this concept is very much appreciated. Our food production is an integral part of our cultures, and our production of our means of subsistence should be supported and protected. Finally, we recognize that FAO has developed voluntary guidelines on land tenure that go a long way to protect, to protect our lands and territories and our rights, as well as enhancing carbon sequestration. But few states or industrialized farming enterprises adhere to them. They are voluntary. Human rights and the rights of indigenous people should not be voluntary, but are actually the legally binding obligations of states. In many parts of the world, there is a great need for land reform. If states don't get land use rights, they will only contribute to global warming. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing the indigenous perspective. Let me proceed with member states, and then we take the question from the back. India, please.
Thank you, Chair. At the outset, congratulations to the speakers, and thank you very much to the organizers for a wonderful session. And thanks for including wetlands and peatlands and so on, which are often neglected in such presentations. Thanks to Brazil. I'll pick up the point from where he left, saying that center of our policy should be the farmer. And at this point, I want all of you to do a reality check. I'll say two things quickly. One is, we must not forget that this is a very small sector where it is only 14% of world's emissions. In that backdrop, let me draw attention of each and every one of you that farming is done by very small farmers. They have very small land holdings in the developing countries. Unlike the developed countries where it is mechanized and land holdings are large. In developing countries, it is rain-fed. And when the speaker said farmers round the table, so you can count on me because I belong to a farming family. And I am saying this with passion because agriculture has been a victim of climate change. What in terms of suggesting it to be a tool for mitigation, we are turning it into a holy providential cow that now you mitigate also. Whereas there is so much to be done in terms of agriculture sector, in terms of vulnerability, impact and adaptation. So let's not forget about the vulnerability of small rain-fed farming communities, which are around 70% of farmers in the world. Having said that, I am also tempted to say that these are the times when we learn, share and introspect. And in introspection, I want FAO to also introspect why this sudden interest in all this. Where was such a big agency when the convention was negotiated and protocol came and 25 years have rolled down? Why this resurgence of sudden interest? And I leave it at that because you see, you may choose to answer or not to answer my question, but I would just say that this is done by farmers which have small land holdings. So please turn your attention first to their vulnerabilities, then their means of adaptation and the impacts that they will suffer. Don't start asking them to also mitigate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. India, I have Austria on the list, then Zimbabwe, then Uruguay, and then we come to the observers. Thank you. Austria, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My delegation would like to contribute to the discussion of this meeting with some experiences that we have made supporting small-scale projects in several developing countries. We have heard that the emissions from agriculture and land use, they represent a serious global problem. What we would like to emphasize is that everyone can contribute to the solution, even through the implementation of small-scale initiatives and projects. For example, we support the agricultural activities of local communities in 2 South American countries and 1 West African countries. These local communities are marginalized, many people there live in poverty, and they are located in a context of deforestation. We support agroecological approaches and practices, and one of our goals is to reinforce the food security. These are definitely small-scale projects. For example, in one of these projects, we support 8 communities. In a second one, we support 10 communities. However, in this regard, let me quote an author who is very famous, and I am sure that many of you know him. His name is Eduardo Galeano from Uruguay, and here what he tells us. Many little people in little places doing little things can change the world. Obviously, this does not mean, this is not to say that we can solve the climate-related problems of agriculture exclusively through the implementation of small-scale projects. But what we want to emphasize is that every initiative counts and every initiative makes a difference for the poor peasants that benefit from it. And for this, it is worth to organize projects even if they are small. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Think small to think big, actually. Next speaker on the list is Zimbabwe, to be followed by Uruguay. Zimbabwe, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to all the panelists and the speakers for this wonderful session. I would like to associate maybe our first comment to those made by India, emphasizing the importance of adaptation in the agricultural sector ahead of mitigation, and also stressing that in our context, also in Zimbabwe, and I believe in most of the countries, developing countries, agriculture contributes quite a lot in most of the other SDGs outside the goal number 13 and the mitigation component. Hence, it's a matter of livelihoods. And has many benefits which we should also recognize before we mitigate. My question is directed to Bruce, who mentioned, I think, something on the importance of digital agriculture and the importance of partnership. I wanted to find out maybe to give a little background. In our context as Zimbabwe, we've seen quite a number of projects which have promoted digital agriculture and shown the possibilities of transferring be it climate services and information to the farmers. But most of these, they've been on pilot basis, and most have not gone beyond pilot stages. So I wanted to find out what could be the game changer to make sure that there's uptake and sustenance of these projects beyond projects, uptake either by farmers or by private sector or by government, and whether there's a good business case for that. And my last on still digital agriculture, in the generation of climate services, we have seen sort of an exclusion of some sort of the people who generate the services, mainly the meteorological services, and focus on transmitting the energy. They're transmitting the information, but without focusing on improving the accuracy, which makes it more usable. So what could be done to solve this? Thank you.
Thank you very much. We collect in this round the comments from Uruguay, and then there are two people in the back asking for the floor. And then I will ask the panel to come back to your questions. Uruguay, please.
Thank you, and thank you all for the presentations. We welcome very much the opportunity to have a space in which we can discuss such important and complex issues as the one we are managing here. In our conception, agriculture, that represents only 14% of global emissions, has unique features as a sector, and therefore mitigation shouldn't be understood in the same way as it is in other sectors. For instance, there are emissions and removals, there is a storage of carbon in harvest agricultural products. Agriculture depends on biological processes, which make emission reductions in absolute terms very difficult. And agriculture plays a key role in safeguarding food security. So we have the challenge in interpreting Article 2.b of Paris Agreement under the context of agriculture. Uruguay copes with this challenge from the perspective of a triple win: more productivity, more resilience, and less emission intensity. And we have reflected this very clear in our INDC, where we included adaptation, but also targets without and with means of implementation. We can reduce emissions intensity in beef sector by 43% with means of implementation, and we can sequester carbon in soils by restoring degraded lands. We address this challenge in a world of growing population and increasing food demand. More adapted and more resilient production systems also lead to an increase in productivity, and therefore to a reduction in emission per unit of product or intensity of emissions. This is the way we see mitigation in agriculture, strongly linked to productivity and sustainable rural development in our country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Uruguay. Germany was also asking for the floor. Can I please ask for short interventions and questions to give time to the panel to react? Germany, please.
Thank you for the presentations, and I think we had a great overview about what we've been talking here in Bonn as well. So we were talking about good examples, we would talk about win, 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 triple win, and we don't know how many wins we have in that reference. You said that already, thanks for this. And we need exchange, and we need good practices. And this is to reach the goal of the Paris Agreement. We have to do both. We have to get especially the greenhouse gas neutrality goal in the second half of the century. We need low emissions, and we need, with respect to food security and the growing world population, we have to rise yields through efficiency, technological progress, and a sustainable way of agriculture. And no one size fits all. That will keep in my mind what we heard earlier on. What we haven't really talked about is money. And maybe it's important that we shift the supports we have in the financial instruments towards this direction. And it's exactly the discussion we have within the EU now, how we can forward this. So maybe to ask to find structures, how to develop, as we were talking about wetlands, for example, the use of wetlands on the one hand and the protection of organic soil possible once at a time. So on the other hand, how can we support this paludiculture cultures? And just to have the national point of view, we last year we published the Climate Action Plan 2050, and there is an agriculture sector within it too. And then we have a goal of reducing the greenhouse gas emissions until 2030 by minus 30% on the basis of 9,090. And just to state the measures which are within its reduction of nitrogen surplus, increasing the percentage of land use of organic farming, reducing emissions from livestock farming, avoiding food waste, which is an important point with a lot of synergies too, and developing innovative climate action concepts. And as we heard, this may be the way forward on the sustainable agriculture for future to go. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Germany, the floor goes to the gentleman just behind you asking for the floor. I think the gentleman with the blue shirt asked first for the floor and then the person next to you. Thank you. Please.
Good morning, Jan Peters, my name, from Greifswald Meyer Center, also speaking for Wetlands International. I'm also very happy to Mr. Rana to highlighting the issue of wetlands and especially peatlands rich in organic soils here on the panel, which is one of the global hotspots for greenhouse gas emissions. And also you mentioned a lot of initiatives and instruments the EU implemented to conserve, restore and use the organic soils in a sustainable way, which we welcome a lot. So far, we see that Europe is, of course, still a hotspot of emissions from peatlands. It's the second largest emitter after Indonesia in this field. And we also see that still the instruments you mentioned fall short of like reaching larger scale implementing of restoration as well as implementation of paludiculture, because still the instruments and incentives are missing for farmers to implement these practices on a large scale. So I would like to ask you, but also all other parties in order to fulfill the commitments under the Paris Agreement, to take the emission hotspots from organic soils, peatlands into account and develop instruments and incentives for farmers to move on in this field. Thank you.
Thank you very much, your neighbor. And then I have one more speaker on the list. Please, short intervention so our panel has a chance to respond. So you have the floor.
I'm Tobias Geist from the Danish Agriculture and Food Council. We are part of the World Farmers Organization, which is also part of the farmers constituency together with IFOAM. A comment to the gentleman from Zimbabwe and India. We agree, of course, that we should be realistic about the impact that agriculture has on climate change. At the same time, we would also like to say that farmers are part of the solution. We can actually mitigate. And I'll give you the example from my own country, from Denmark. Since 1990, we've been able to increase production by some 20%, and we've reduced CO2 emissions 24%. So we've seen this decoupling of emissions from production. And this has to do with agricultural advisory services. This has to do with genetics. This has to do with food feed conversion rates. And in doing all that, we would stress that there are many production systems, and really we should not pitch the big ones against the small, because the solutions are in both big and smaller farms. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the lady to the right, last question, please a short one, and then we go back to the panel.
Thanks. I'm Kerry Jones from the UK. I'm a member of the World Farmers Organization. I wanted to pick up on a line that Dr. Moses said in his presentation on making sense to the individual farmer. And I wonder if all the panelists could share their experiences of facilitating access to farmers of this research and expertise. And in such exchanges, how they also capture on-farm innovation, because farmers can be incredibly innovative. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would go immediately back to our panel. May I start with a question from Zimbabwe, because I think it's a very pertinent one. How can we scale up digital access for farmers? How can we make this revolution happen? Where can funding for this coming in? Bruce, would you like to go first? And I'm sure, Lucy, you would have an opinion on agrometeorological data as well, I guess. But Bruce, if you want to kick off.
Yes, so I'm pretty nervous about silver bullet. So perhaps we should be careful that digital agriculture is not seen as a silver bullet, because I think basically farming has to become a really productive livelihood opportunity for smallholder farmers, and that means markets, infrastructure, policies, advisory services, the full spectrum of things. So digital agriculture is not going to solve all those problems, but it can be a part of the solution. I think, one problem is network connectivity, but, in a decade's time, I think it's going to be transformed. I'm hoping. I would believe so. I think a key part of the scaling up is the private sector, really getting them involved. And for them to get involved, there has to be money in the business of farming. So, and that's usually to the benefit of the farmers, the nation, etc. Some of the best examples of scaling up that I've seen are coming from India, where there are millions of farmers being reached through ICT companies and these kinds of applications happening.
Thank you very much. Victoria, you wanted to comment as well?
I'd like to pick up on the point that the lady from the UK made, but also the gentleman from the WFO as well. Thank you for your comments. In representing New Zealand here, I also we're a member of the Global Research Alliance, which is a partner with the World Farmer Organization. And I think I'd like to just reflect on some of the work that we've done with you in partnership, hosting an exchange program with the WFO where farmers, innovative farmers from across the world come together once a year. New Zealand's hosted it, but also so has South America as well. And this is a really good opportunity not only to share national experiences of innovative farming, but also global experiences. And I think that's a great example of good international exchange. But in terms of what we do locally in New Zealand, we have a pilot farm project that's set up, which they're demonstration farms of innovative practice that has come from the bottom up. And it's really, it's amazing to see what these farmers are doing on the ground, not because of policy imperatives or economic advantage, but actually because of the environmental sustainability and the land stewardship issues that they want to ensure that their land and their farm is there for generations to come. So.
Thank you very much. Herwig, peatlands, wetlands came up several times. Yeah. Your comments, please.
Thank you. Yeah, it was my presentation, so it's of course right that we need to do more there, and as you know, there's currently discussions going on in the EU on how to shape the new agricultural policy, and I can't comment on details there because there's nothing to present. You also know that it's part of our climate policy, and this is also a policy that is being discussed at the moment. But just the fact that it is part of it and that it gets importance is the real important issue. So whatever can be done will be done, and we are of course aware that in Europe, as I said in my presentation, there's also a lot of organic soils. So farmers in India are not the only ones. There's a lot of hotspots around the world, and also working together, and that's why the outcome of the work under Substa is so important. maybe together people can also come up with some advice how to deal with it. Collaboration can give a lot of results, and that's also why the EU is very interested in the topic. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Havik, Lucy, you want to comment? Yes, so we need to have a major transaction to get the microphone to you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Maybe to respond on the digital platform in terms of bringing on agriculture into it. Kenya is one country that has gone into that in quite a number of spheres. But the one I can talk of with the role of certainty is that where the Ministry of Agriculture is using the mobile phone to distribute the subsidy fertilizer to the smallholder farmers. And in terms of controlling even the dispensation from the warehouses, even to know who is the farmer who's taking the fertilizer, the type of fertilizer, depending on the type of crops they have fed into the mobile phone, that if they are growing maize or beans, the acreage, all that data, once it is fed, then it is then relayed to the warehouse that farmer A or B is supposed to get this amount of fertilizer and those kind of details. Like my colleague said, of course, internet connectivity, of course, is a challenge as now. But again, for it to move from pilot to a more sustainable approach, I think there need to be more players, both the private sector, the farmer, the government, and all that. It has to be a teamwork, because the government can only facilitate to a certain extent, but then the players must then make it a business case, and then it will run. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think digital access to farmers and farming information systems might actually be a programmatic area for the Green Climate Fund also to engage if there's broader agreement on that, because I think that this is the most common need for all nations to base their adaptation needs early on. Dr. Moser, you have a comment, please, a very short one. We are risking to run over time and we want to have a short wrap up as well, please.
Oh, sorry. So very quickly, in Brazil, we think that component in terms of technology and communication is a key component. There are many components there in terms of how do we how the farmers access information, and there's lots of information that's already there, but it's not really well wrapped up so that farmers can digest that information. So we are thinking about in terms of how when we look at the farmers at the center, we have to understand how do we produce mechanisms so that the information can be constantly being digested and informed in such a manner that is useful. We're thinking about like we call a climate intelligence center, which is the idea of using multiple computer technologies for data crushing, data analyzing. There is so much data there. They are meaningful for the agricultural people, but they are not being used because they are not packaged in such a way that makes sense. So just wrapping up, there's technology. We just need to put people thinking how to implement it. Data crushing, it's a very useful tool. Of course, there are places where there's no information, and it's something that has to be addressed. But there's also information that's not being used. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. That's already a very powerful closing remark on the digital side. But now I would ask my colleague Alexandre Maybeck, who is one of the lead authors of our flagship report from last year of the state of food and agriculture production, to give us briefly your thoughts in wrapping up what you heard in this session and what a way forward could look like. Alexandre, please.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all of you, because when listening to everything, there seems to be a real convergence on some key elements. The first one, obviously, is the urgency to act. And in that, there are, I think, two elements. One is this figure of emissions. Agriculture is a small part of it, 14%, but it's also a big driver of deforestation. So the whole makes 24%. And then with the reduction, because globally you have 3/4 of emission, which is energy. And and the fourth quarter is land use and agriculture. And we know we know technically how to decrease the emissions in energy. It's technically possible. The big question is how you do it in agriculture, which is much more complex. It's biological processes. But there will be no 2-degree pathway without agriculture, and we don't know how to do agriculture above 2 degrees. And there are big opportunities, ways to reduce emissions while improving food security and nutrition, to decouple production and emissions, as has been said in one of the interventions. And from all the intervention, the 2 big types distinguished by Martial in the beginning seems to me quite true. Improving resource efficiency and productivity, and increasing carbon in the landscape, both above ground and underground. And so many links between these 2 types of intervention, a landscape approach to a certain extent. And this drives me to 2 comments on techniques and practices. Agriculture, it is about complex biological processes, and we have to take into account trade-offs and combination of gases. I think the rice example is really a very illustrative one. You cannot just find the silver bullet. If you don't take into account the rest, because we are in complex systems, you don't reduce emissions. And so you need a combination of practices, and these combination of practices are very context specific. What works in Japan may work in the rest of Asia for rice. And the other example in Tigray, for instance, how you combine measures in a landscape approach. For wetlands, there are diverse solutions in diverse countries of Europe. And on the other side, you also need to integrate multiple objectives. And the agroforestry example in Kenya was a very nice and illustrative one. Because very often, as has been said, the driver is not mitigation for a farmer. For the farmer, the driver is productivity, income, livelihood, and sustainability on the long term, because farmers think about next generation. They are keepers of the land and natural resources. And so most of the good examples which work take into account multiple objectives, the ABC plan in Brazil, productivity, livelihoods, food security, and nutrition. And so this is probably one of the first parameters which makes it work, and make it work on the long term. And then from all the discussions on what makes it work, I notice research, the need for good research, and including innovation from farmer and how it works in a context, policies and very organized policies, as in Kenya, the European Union, Japan, New Zealand, Brazil, all these examples were clear. And I like very much this idea in Brazil that at a certain moment, the change overcomes the policy. The policy becomes a driver, and then you have a transformational change. But the first thing probably to make it work is to have the farmer at the center. And at the center of what? The center of partnerships, importance of the private sector, and to have it framed in a broad future vision. And just one last comment that from a perspective of agriculture seems to me extremely important. It's the breadth of measures that contribute to mitigation, things about which you wouldn't think, like peste des petits ruminants, and most important of all, increasing resilience and adaptation is a mitigation measure. Because if you use fertilizer without having a crop, you emit. If you have a cow which doesn't have milk because she has nothing to eat, you emit. And so, to a great extent, I think what has been shown here is that you cannot isolate the objective of mitigation from the other global objectives of sustainable development including poverty eradication, food security and nutrition, and also adaptation. And this is probably one of the challenges that we have here, is to explain that to non-agricultural people. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Alexandre. Agriculture, an area with many wins, but also a lot of complexity. Thank you, everybody, for being here today. Thank you to the panelists for excellent contributions. Thank you to Katia and the Secretariat for organizing. Thank you for your great questions and for all of you and showing interest, which is for all of us a big encouragement. Thank you very much and have a good day.